Hey guys. Tonight we slip quietly into silk-lined nightmares and candlelit corridors as you begin your first night inside the glittering trap known as Versailles. The palace glows like something out of a dream, chandeliers dripping with light, marble floors reflecting gold like still water, and yet, within minutes, your feet already ache and your back reminds you that beauty here is mostly for looking at, not living in. You're about to serve the most famous woman in Europe, Marie Antoinette herself, and honestly, you probably wouldn't survive a single week doing this job without crying into a lace sleeve. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight, and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive before sunrise, because in Versailles, the day begins long before the sun decides to show up. The palace doesn't wake, it hums. Even in the pre-dawn quiet, footsteps echo in corridors like whispers that refuse to sleep. You follow the senior attendants. Your shoes already too stiff, your dress already too tight, and your nerves stretched thinner than the lace at your cuffs. Versailles is not simply a home, it is a machine. And you, unfortunately, are one of its smallest moving parts. Historically, Versailles housed anywhere from 3,000 to 10,000 people at a time. Depending on the season, an entire city disguised as a palace. Yet despite its size, space is oddly scarce. You are assigned a sleeping corner barely wider than a modern yoga mat, though sadly without the calming meditation playlist. You pass servants carrying basins, others hauling folded gowns that weigh more than a weekend suitcase. One of them mutters something about the Queen's morning ritual, and you pretend you understand, nodding as though you've always known that waking a monarch involves more choreography than launching a space shuttle. And in a way, it does. The morning ritual you're preparing for is called the lever, the ceremonial awakening of the Queen. Louis XIV made this kind of ritual famous, turning waking up into a public performance. And by Marie Antoinette's time, the tradition still lingers like an awkward family heirloom nobody dares throw away. You'd think waking up would involve, just waking up. But no, here, dozens of people may attend simply to watch the Queen open her eyes. Historians still debate whether Marie Antoinette enjoyed these rituals or merely tolerated them like a mandatory staff meeting that could never be cancelled. You're handed your first task, preparing undergarments that must be warmed before the Queen wears them. Because nothing says absolute monarchy like preheated underwear. You try not to drop anything. A senior maid whispers that the Queen prefers fabrics aired near the fire, not directly over it, a detail apparently important enough to ruin lives over. Versailles runs on etiquette the way modern offices run on Wi-Fi, lose connection, and everything collapses. As you move through the Queen's chambers, you notice something unexpected. The smell. Not unpleasant, exactly, just layered. Floral perfumes mingle with powder, wax, and the faint reminder that bathing is not exactly fashionable in this century. Cleanliness here often comes in the form of scent rather than soap. A lesser-known truth. Full immersion bathing was still viewed with suspicion in the 18th century. Believed by some to weaken the body. So perfume becomes armor, against both odor and anxiety. You pause near a window, Watching dawn creep across the gardens designed by André Le Notre, vast, symmetrical, and unnervingly perfect. The world outside seems calm, ordered. Inside, everything feels like it could unravel at the slightest misplaced ribbon. Someone nudges you forward. The Queen will wake soon. And suddenly, the reality settles in. You are not here to admire the gold leaf ceilings or wander the endless halls like a tourist with a camera and comfortable sneakers. You are here to anticipate needs before they are spoken. To move silently. To notice everything. And to exist without ever truly being seen. The door to the Queen's chamber looms ahead. And as you take your place among the attendants, you realize this palace may be beautiful. But it is also very, very tired. And so are you already. You're already standing when the Queen begins to wake. Though, wake feels like far too simple a word for what unfolds before you. The room does not stir all at once. It gathers itself. Like an orchestra preparing for a performance no one dares to miss. The lever begins. A chamberlain enters first, followed by ladies of rank whose job is, quite literally, to be present. Presence here is a privilege, and a power. To stand close to the Queen as she opens her eyes is the social equivalent of sitting front row at the world's most exclusive show. Except the ticket price is your entire existence. You try not to shift your weight as the silence stretches. Marie Antoinette does not leap from bed. She rises gradually, like someone aware that the entire room is watching, because they are. Historically, this ritual evolved from the court of Louis XIV, who transformed daily life into ceremony to keep the nobility busy and politically harmless. If they were fighting over who got to hand him his slippers, they weren't plotting rebellion. Historians still debate whether this system truly maintained stability or merely disguised simmering resentment beneath layers of brocade and bows. A duchess steps forward to present the Queen's chemise. But here's where things become complicated. Rank determines who hands what to whom. If someone of higher status enters the room mid-ritual, the privilege shifts instantly. A lady who was just about to pass the garment must step back, surrendering the honor like someone losing their turn in an elaborate, silk-covered game of musical chairs. You witness this happen in real time. A countess pauses, freezes, as a princess arrives. The chemise changes hands. No one speaks. The tension, however, could slice through marble. You suddenly miss modern office politics. At least no one today loses their job because someone with a fancier title walked into the break room. The Queen extends her arms, and the chemise is slipped on with reverence normally reserved for sacred relics. You notice how heavy the air feels, thick with powder and expectation. It's strange to think that this quiet choreography is considered governance adjacent. The monarchy is not only ruling France, it is performing itself. A lesser-known fact, attendance at these rituals was often sought after by nobles desperate to maintain favor. Being seen mattered almost as much as being heard. And sometimes more. You catch sight of the Queen's face as her hair is gently adjusted. She looks young. You remember hearing she arrived in France at 14. Married off to solidify an alliance between Austria and France. Now she carries the weight of an entire nation's opinion, and its gossip columns. Which, in this century, arrive in the form of whispered rumors and printed pamphlets. A maid beside you murmurs something about the Queen's complexion. Egg whites were once used as a tightening facial treatment. Another servant mentions pigeon droppings being rumored in certain beauty mixtures, though thankfully not today. You silently thank history for small mercies. Historians still debate how much of Marie Antoinette's infamous extravagance was personal taste versus political expectation. A queen was meant to dazzle, to embody the wealth of the state. Even if the state was quietly drowning in debt. The queen stands now, and the next phase begins. Stockings. Shoes. Petticoats. Each item presented in the correct order. By the correct person. At the correct moment. You hand off warmed fabric at precisely the right time. Trying not to think about how one misplaced movement could ripple into embarrassment, or worse. Outside, the gardens glow in morning light. Inside, time feels suspended. No one yawns. No one fidgets. It's almost impressive, really, like watching a room full of people pretend they're not human. You realize something then. This ritual is not about comfort. Not about practicality. Not even about dignity. It's about visibility. Power here is proximity, and proximity is everything. And as the queen's gown is brought forward, layered, structured, magnificent, you understand that your role is not merely to assist. You are part of the illusion. A moving piece in a living painting. And like all paintings, it must never crack. The gown arrives like a slow-moving storm cloud made entirely of silk. You and the other attendants step forward instinctively. Because dressing the queen is less like helping someone get ready and more like assembling a very delicate, very expensive architectural structure. The layers are not optional. They are expected. First comes the shift you already warmed, thankfully still acceptable and not accidentally toasted like a forgotten croissant. Then the stays, stiff and unyielding, designed to sculpt the queen's torso into the fashionable silhouette of the time. You hold your breath as the laces are tightened. Fashion in the 18th century is not about comfort, it's about geometry. The bodice presses inward while the skirts will soon expand outward, creating the illusion of a tiny waist floating above a sea of fabric. You briefly wonder how anyone ever sat down in this century without filing a formal request first. Historically, court gowns could span several feet in width. Especially with panniers, the side hoops that create that iconic winged shape. Walking through doorways becomes a strategy game. Turning around requires planning. Historians still debate whether these styles were meant purely for aesthetic grandeur or subtly reinforced the social distance between royalty and everyone else, because no one wearing 3 feet of silk on each side is exactly approachable. You lift the next layer carefully. The petticoat glimmers with embroidery that likely took months to complete. Silver threads catch the morning light. And for a moment, it's genuinely beautiful. Then you remember how heavy it is. A lesser-known truth. Some court gowns weighed over 20 pounds. That's roughly equivalent to carrying a modern suitcase, all day, while smiling politely and pretending your ribs aren't negotiating surrender. The queen remains still as more layers are added. You notice how practiced she is at this, how she holds herself with a quiet patience that feels less like vanity and more like endurance. Someone murmurs about the heat. Versailles was notorious for being drafty in winter and stifling in summer. Today, it leans toward warm. The candles alone seem determined to melt both wax and morale. And yet, The queen cannot simply request lighter clothing. Court fashion is dictated by expectation, not practicality. Another maid adjusts the stomacher, the decorative triangular panel that sits at the front of the bodice. It is pinned into place with alarming precision. You watch those pins closely, silently promising never to be the one who drops one. Because retrieving it would involve crouching. And crouching in this environment feels like an act of social rebellion. You catch a glimpse of yourself in a polished surface, not quite a mirror. More like an optimistic reflection. You look smaller than you remember. Less solid. As if the palace has already begun to smooth your edges into something more functional. A whisper travels through the room, something about the Queen's preference for lighter fabrics lately. It's said she favors muslin in private, a scandalously simple material compared to traditional silks. Historians still debate whether this preference reflected genuine personal taste or a subtle shift toward more natural aesthetics inspired by Enlightenment ideals. Either way, simplicity here still requires an army. The final outer gown is lifted into place. Its train spills across the floor like liquid sunlight. You help arrange it, smoothing folds that seem determined to wrinkle at the worst possible moment. And then comes the scent. Powdered violet. Rosewater. A hint of amber. Perfume is applied generously, not just for fragrance, but as a shield against the realities of 18th century hygiene. Bathing, while not unheard of, is not the daily habit modern sensibilities might prefer. Instead, cleanliness is constructed. Layer by layer. Scent by scent. A maid jokes quietly that Versailles runs less on water and more on optimism. You nearly smile. The Queen shifts slightly, testing the weight of the ensemble. For a moment, you wonder what it must feel like to be dressed into something so magnificent, and so removable. Outside, the world is changing. Philosophers are writing about liberty. Pamphlets whisper about reform. Bread prices creep upward. But here, inside these walls, the day still begins with silk and ceremony. And as you step back, watching the Queen transformed into the living symbol she must be, you realize something quietly unsettling. This isn't just clothing. It's armor. And you helped fasten every piece. You're beginning to understand that Versailles does not run on common sense. It runs on rules. Not the kind written neatly in a handbook. Either, though honestly, that might have saved everyone a great deal of whispering. These rules live in memory, in tradition, and in the raised eyebrow of someone who outranks you by 3 generations and one particularly successful marriage. You learn your first unwritten rule almost immediately. Never move before someone of higher rank has moved. You discover this when you instinctively step forward to adjust the Queen's sleeve, only to freeze mid-motion as a lady-in-waiting glides in ahead of you. Your hand retreats like it's just touched a hot stove. The sleeve remains slightly crooked for a full 5 seconds. No one breathes. Finally, the lady fixes it. Disaster avoided. In Versailles, timing is not just everything, it's survival. Historically, court etiquette was designed to reinforce hierarchy so precisely that even the act of sitting required permission in certain contexts. A stool could signify rank. A chair could declare influence. And a cushion, well, a cushion could spark an entire scandal. Historians still debate whether this obsession with protocol maintained order or quietly suffocated initiative. You are introduced to another rule. Never speak unless spoken to. A simple concept. In theory. Less simple when you're holding a tray that's slowly tipping because someone decided that acknowledging your presence would violate centuries of tradition. You adjust your grip carefully, reminding yourself that invisibility here is not an insult, it's an expectation. A lesser-known fact, servants were often required to memorize the lineage and titles of key nobles to avoid accidental breaches of etiquette. Getting someone's rank wrong could cause offense that lingered longer than an unpaid bill. You silently promise to study later. Or possibly never sleep again. As the queen prepares to leave her chamber, the choreography continues. Doors must be opened in the correct order. Curtains drawn at the proper moment. Even the way you stand, angled slightly away yet attentive, is governed by custom. Someone murmurs about the entree, the formal public appearance that follows the private dressing ritual. It's astonishing how many people will gather simply to watch the queen exist. You recall hearing that Versailles was built not just as a residence, but as a stage, a place where monarchy could be seen and admired. Louis XIV understood the power of spectacle, and by Marie Antoinette's time, the performance still continues, though perhaps with less enthusiasm. Historians still debate how much the Queen's Austrian origins influenced her reception at court. Being foreign in Versailles is like bringing store-bought dessert to a gathering of professional bakers, technically acceptable, but never fully trusted. As you move through the corridors, you notice how sound behaves strangely here. Footsteps echo. Whispers travel. Silence feels heavy. And everywhere, there are eyes. Another rule reveals itself. Never turn your back abruptly. You practice subtle pivots, hoping you look graceful rather than like someone trying to remember a dance they were never taught. A maid beside you quietly jokes that Versailles has more rules than a modern airline baggage policy, and at least with the airline. You eventually get to sit down. You almost laugh. But not quite. The queen pauses near a window, and everyone else adjusts accordingly, forming a living frame around her presence. You realize then that these rules are not merely about respect. They are about control. About ensuring that every movement reinforces the idea of order, even when the world beyond the palace walls grows increasingly unpredictable. Outside, Paris stirs. Markets open. Voices rise. Inside, the illusion of perfection must remain intact. And as you stand perfectly still, resisting the urge to shift your aching feet, you understand something quietly terrifying. You are learning the rules. And once learned, they cannot be forgotten. By mid-morning, you've already learned that Versailles smells like a bouquet that's trying very hard to hide something. At first, it's pleasant. Orange blossom, lavender, rose. But beneath it, faint, persistent, lingers the truth of thousands of people living in close quarters in a time when daily bathing is considered, at best, unnecessary, and at worst, suspicious. You watch as one of the Queen's attendants refreshes the scent around her, a delicate mist applied to gloves, lace cuffs, and the air itself, like someone attempting to perfume an entire mood. Because here, cleanliness is less about water and more about fragrance. Historically, frequent full-body bathing fell out of favor after earlier centuries linked hot baths with illness. By the 18th century, Many believed that washing too often opened the pores to dangerous airs. Historians still debate how widespread this belief truly was, but judging by the enthusiasm for perfume, it certainly had influence. You're handed a small cloth lightly soaked in scented vinegar. Your task is to tuck it discreetly into the folds of the queen's gown. Not for decoration. For survival. A lesser-known fact, vinegar was often used in this period as a kind of hygienic stand-in, believed to purify air and ward off disease. In crowded environments like Versailles, it was practically the 18th century version of hand sanitizer, just with a much sharper personality. Another maid whispers that some courtiers even carried pomanders, small containers filled with aromatic substances, to mask unpleasant surroundings. You briefly imagine modern commuters clutching pomanders on the subway. Honestly, it might catch on. As you move through the corridors again, the scent grows thicker, not offensive. Exactly, just layered, like too many candles burning in a small room. You notice how servants refresh linens constantly. Shirts are changed often. Hands are wiped. Faces powdered. Because if bathing is rare, appearance must compensate. Powder becomes its own weather system here, drifting lightly through the air, settling on shoulders and sleeves like soft snowfall. You suppress a sneeze. Barely. The queen pauses to receive a visitor. And as she does, another attendant discreetly reapplies perfume to her hair. It's said that certain fragrances were chosen not just for pleasantness, but for symbolism. Orange blossom suggested purity. Jasmine hinted at elegance. Historians still debate whether Marie Antoinette had a signature scent or simply followed evolving trends within the court. Either way, scent here is strategy. You pass a window briefly ajar, and the fresh air feels almost shocking, like stepping outside after hours in a crowded theater. For a moment, the world smells real. Grass. Stone. Morning. Then the window is closed. And the palace returns. A quiet joke circulates among the servants that Versailles is less a palace and more a very well-perfumed village. You think of modern air fresheners trying to do heroic work in tiny apartments. Some battles never change. As the queen moves on, leaving a trail of violet and rose behind her, you realize something subtle but unsettling. The scent is part of the illusion. A reminder that here, discomfort must always be softened. Reality must always be masked. And if something unpleasant cannot be removed, it must be covered. Preferably with something that smells expensive. You adjust the fold of her gown once more, ensuring the vinegar cloth remains hidden. Because in Versailles, even the air must behave properly. You're led down a narrow corridor you hadn't noticed before, tucked behind the queen's dressing rooms. Past a door so plain it almost feels suspicious. Inside lies the wig room. And it is not comforting. At first glance, it resembles a museum of powdered clouds. Dozens, no, hundreds, of wigs rest on wooden stands, each styled into architectural wonders that defy both gravity and common sense. Towering curls. Braided constructions. Entire landscapes of hair. You feel as though you've stumbled into a forest made of lace and ambition. Historically, wigs were not just fashionable, they were essential markers of status. By the 18th century, elaborate hairstyles had become a visual shorthand for rank and refinement. Historians still debate whether the height of these creations reflected changing aesthetic tastes or a kind of competitive display among the elite. Either way, subtlety did not win. A wig attendant approaches with the seriousness of someone handling royal artillery. You're instructed to resist. Carefully. Because beneath the powder and silk ribbons lies a truth no one likes to mention too loudly. Wigs require maintenance. Constant maintenance. A lesser-known fact, wigs of the period were often made from human hair. Horsehair, or goat hair, and despite regular powdering, they could attract pests. Yes. Pests. The powder, often made from starch or flour, helped absorb oils and create that signature pale finish, but it also provided an inviting environment for uninvited guests. You watch as a wig is gently brushed, then inspected, then lightly tapped, just in case anything decides to relocate. You try not to imagine. The attendant explains that some wigs were even stored in special boxes when not in use, a precaution that sounds very reassuring until you realize it implies previous reasons for needing such precautions. A maid beside you jokes quietly that Versailles invented dry shampoo centuries early, just with higher stakes. You almost smile again. The Queen's selected wig today is modest by court standards, meaning it won't require its own postal code. It's powdered carefully, scented lightly, adorned with ribbons. You help secure it in place, using pins that feel longer than your patience. The weight settles onto her head with practiced familiarity, and you notice how still she becomes once it's set, as though sudden movement might disturb the delicate balance. Historians still debate how comfortable these hairstyles truly were, though surviving portraits suggest that endurance was considered fashionable. Outside the wig room, you glimpse a tray holding small scented sachets. Lavender, citrus peel, clove, placed discreetly to keep everything agreeable. You wonder briefly how modern hair salons would react to this level of preparation. Probably with fewer candles and more complaints. As the Queen turns, her hair now transformed into yet another symbol of elegance, you realize something quietly unsettling. Nothing here is effortless. Not the gowns. Not the rituals. Not even the hair. Every detail requires labor, adjustment, supervision. And as you step back, hands faintly dusted with powder, you understand that beauty in Versailles is never natural. It is constructed, maintained, and occasionally, very carefully inspected. By the time the Queen is fully prepared, you assume, quite reasonably, that the hardest part of the morning must be over. You are wrong. Because now comes dining. And dining in Versailles is less about eating, and more about being seen eating. You follow the procession into the dining chamber, where the table gleams under candlelight, already arranged with a precision that would make modern event planners weep with admiration. Silverware aligned, plates warmed, napkins folded into shapes that suggest both elegance and mild intimidation. Historically, royal meals were often public events. Members of the court could attend the grand couvert, where the royal family dined before an audience. Historians still debate whether Marie Antoinette enjoyed these spectacles or found them exhausting, though considering she couldn't exactly sneak a snack without witnesses. The answer may lean toward the latter. You take your place among the attendants lining the room. And then, the Queen arrives. Everyone bows. No one sits unless permitted. Food is presented like offerings, roasted meats, delicate pastries, fruit arranged with geometric optimism. The queen samples. Lightly. Carefully. Meanwhile, you stand close enough to smell everything. And eat nothing. A lesser-known truth, despite the lavish spreads, royal appetites were not always as grand as the display suggested. Much of the food existed to demonstrate abundance rather than satisfy hunger. Which makes this entire scene feel a bit like hosting a dinner party where the centerpiece is the concept of dinner. You pass a dish forward. Your hands remain steady, though your stomach quietly negotiates with your dignity. A maid beside you whispers that some attendants grew skilled at surviving on crumbs, literally. Not stealing. Just intercepting opportunity. You consider this survival strategy. The queen takes a sip of wine. Another bite. Conversation flows gently around her, polite and measured. Because meals here are also political. To sit near the queen. To be acknowledged. To exchange even a brief remark, these moments carry weight. You notice how laughter is carefully moderated. Too loud would be improper. Too quiet might seem unfriendly. It's a delicate balance, like attending a formal dinner where everyone is secretly grading each other. Historians still debate whether the opulence of these meals contributed significantly to public resentment, particularly as food shortages worsened in parts of France. Outside these walls, bread prices had begun to rise. Inside, pastries gleam untouched. You adjust a serving tray, careful not to clatter. Noise, like everything else, must be managed. A small incident occurs when a noble drops a fork. The sound echoes. Conversation pauses. Then resumes. A maid later jokes that in Versailles, a falling fork carries more drama than a battlefield, though thankfully with fewer casualties. The queen finishes. The signal is subtle, a slight movement of her hand. And just like that, the meal concludes. Food remains. Plates still full. Wine barely touched. You help clear the table. Your movements precise. And as you do, you realize something quietly strange. The abundance here is not meant to nourish. It is meant to reassure. To display. To declare that the world remains orderly, prosperous, controlled, even when whispers beyond the palace suggest otherwise. You carry away a tray that could feed several families. And as you pass through the corridor once more, you understand that in Versailles, hunger wears many disguises. You begin to notice that the queen's smile appears often. And yet, not always naturally. It arrives at the right moments, when a noble bows a little too deeply. When a compliment lingers in the air like an over-perfumed cloud. When conversation drifts toward topics that require warmth but not sincerity. It is a smile that behaves. Historically, royal demeanor was not simply personal, it was political. A monarch's expression could influence favor, signal approval, or quietly end a conversation without a single word. Historians still debate whether Marie Antoinette's famously charming presence helped sustain loyalty at court or masked deeper tensions among those who served her. You stand nearby as she greets a visiting duchess. The exchange is brief, pleasant, perfect. And yet, as the duchess retreats, you notice the smile fade, not dramatically, just efficiently. like a candle gently snuffed. A lesser-known fact: etiquette manuals of the time advised women of rank to maintain a composed expression in public, as excessive emotional display was considered inelegant. In other words, resting polite face was essential. You adjust the queen's sleeve again, now perfectly straight, remembering the near catastrophe from earlier. The rules are becoming instinctive. Another attendant murmurs that the queen has been practicing moderation in her public manner lately. Too much laughter can be criticized. Too little can seem cold. It's a balancing act that makes modern social media presence feel refreshingly simple. A lady in waiting shares a quiet joke. At least today's influences can step away from the camera. The queen, unfortunately, cannot log off. You observe how the queen listens. She tilts her head slightly, maintains eye contact, responds with just enough warmth to satisfy expectation. It's a performance, but not an insincere one. More like a role she has learned to inhabit. Historians still debate how comfortable she truly felt in this role, given her upbringing in Vienna and the abrupt transition into French court life. You remember hearing that she arrived in France as a teenager, unfamiliar with the language and customs, a reminder that even queens must learn to adapt. The room shifts as another guest is announced. A marquis this time. The queen smiles again. And you notice something subtle. The timing is perfect. Never too soon. Never too late. A small gesture, but here, precision matters. A maid later whispers that some courtiers judge favor by the length of a smile. You wonder if anyone has ever measured it. Probably. As the audience continues, you sense the effort beneath the elegance. Smiling for hours is surprisingly tiring, something anyone who's endured a long group photo session might understand. Except here, the session never really ends. Outside, the afternoon light softens. Inside, the queen remains luminous, composed, engaged. And as you watch her greet yet another visitor, you realize that this smile is not merely an expression. It is a duty, a signal, a shield. And like everything else in Versailles, it must never slip. By the afternoon, you begin to understand that Versailles does not run on gold. It runs on gossip. You hear it before you see it, whispers sliding through corridors like silk over marble. A murmur near the tapestries. A pause in conversation when someone important passes. Information here travels faster than any royal messenger. And far more creatively. Historically, court life depended heavily on reputation. Favor could rise or fall on perception alone, making rumor a powerful social currency. Historians still debate how much influence gossip truly had on political decisions, though it certainly shaped alliances and rivalries within the palace. You're tasked with delivering a note, sealed, discreet, and carried with the utmost care. You are not meant to know its contents. Naturally, this makes everyone curious. A fellow maid hints that even silence can be interpreted here. Not speaking about something might mean more than discussing it openly. It's like attending a meeting where the agenda is unspoken and the minutes are written in glances. A lesser-known fact: pamphlets and satirical writings circulated beyond the palace walls, often exaggerating or inventing stories about the queen's behavior. Inside Versailles, the whispers are softer, but no less potent. You pass two courtiers speaking quietly about fashion expenses. Another pair discuss a recent performance. Someone else mentions bread shortages in Paris, quickly, carefully, as though the words themselves might stain the air. Historians still debate how aware Marie Antoinette was of public sentiment during these years, and how filtered her information may have been by those around her. You wonder how much truth survives the journey through so many mouths. A maid jokes that Versailles is like a modern group chat, except messages are delivered face to face and can ruin your life faster. You pretend not to hear. The Queen receives visitors again, and with each interaction, subtle narratives take shape. Who was greeted warmly? Who was acknowledged briefly? Who was kept waiting? Each moment becomes material. You notice how people watch one another, not just the Queen. Eyes linger, assess, compare. It's a silent exchange of status. A noblewoman adjusts her glove after speaking with the Queen, as though sealing the interaction. You overhear someone later remark that the Queen seemed particularly kind today. Another insists she appeared distracted. Both accounts will circulate. Both will evolve. And by evening, they may bear little resemblance to what you witnessed. A lesser-known truth: servants themselves sometimes became conduits of information. Intentionally or otherwise. You suddenly feel very aware of your own presence. Your silence. Your observations. Historians still debate the extent to which internal court gossip contributed to the broader narratives that shaped Marie Antoinette's public image. But as you move through the palace, carrying trays and messages, you sense how easily stories grow. A glance becomes a preference. A delay becomes an insult. A smile becomes favor. And as you pass yet another whispered conversation, you realize something quietly unsettling. In Versailles, reality is negotiable. But rumor is forever. By the time evening settles over Versailles, you expect the pace to soften. Instead, it sharpens. Candles are lit in long rows, their flames flickering like tiny sentries guarding the night. The palace glows again, not with morning brightness, but with something warmer, more theatrical. And you are still on your feet. The Queen's day does not simply end. It transitions. Historically, evenings at court were filled with entertainments, music, cards, conversation, all designed to sustain both morale and hierarchy. Historians still debate whether these gatherings served primarily as leisure or as subtle tools of social management. Either way, they were mandatory. You assist in preparing the salon. Chairs arranged. Fans placed. Small tables positioned for games that will stretch long past the hour when any reasonable person would consider sleep. A maid whispers that Versailles has redefined bedtime as a suggestion. You quietly agree. The Queen arrives, now in evening attire, lighter than the morning gown, but no less deliberate. Music begins. Soft. Measured. Conversation blooms around her. You notice how fatigue hides itself behind posture. No one slouches. No one yawns. Even as the hours lengthen. A lesser-known fact: candlelight was carefully managed in the palace. Both for ambience and practicality. Wax was expensive, and its use often reflected status. Tonight, there is no shortage. The room shimmers. You pass refreshments, delicate sweets, wine poured with precision. Again, you do not partake. The scent of sugared almonds drifts past you like a gentle temptation. You remind yourself that you are here to serve, not to snack. Historians still debate how exhausting this constant visibility must have been for the royal family, whose presence was expected even when energy waned. You see it now, the effort behind elegance. The Queen listens attentively to a musician, smiles at a remark, participates in a card game. Each action measured, intentional. A noble drops a card. Laughter follows, soft, contained. A maid later jokes that even humor here must wear formal attire. You nearly laugh again. Time stretches. Outside, the gardens darken. Inside, the night refuses to rest. You adjust a curtain slightly, ensuring no draught disturbs the candles. Small tasks. Endless. And as the final notes of music fade, you sense the day's weight settling. But there is still more to come. Because in Versailles, exhaustion is not a reason to stop. It is simply another detail to conceal. And as you stand in the warm glow of flickering light, you realize something quietly profound. Here, even fatigue must be elegant. As the evening lingers, you begin to notice something the candlelight tries very hard to soften. People cough. Quietly. Discreetly. Behind fans or lace handkerchiefs. Versailles may shimmer like a jewel box, but beneath the silk and ceremony, it hums with the realities of close living. Thousands of bodies sharing air that moves reluctantly through long corridors and crowded salons. Historically, illness was a constant presence in court life. From seasonal fevers to more persistent ailments like tuberculosis, even the most gilded surroundings offered little protection. Historians still debate how much the architecture of Versailles, grand but poorly ventilated, contributed to the spread of disease. You see a lady in waiting dab her wrist with vinegar. Another adjusts a scented sachet tucked into her bodice. Preventative measures here are less about medicine and more about atmosphere. A lesser-known fact, scented vinegar, herbs, and even small nosegays were commonly carried to ward off what was believed to be bad air, thought to cause illness. It's essentially the 18th century version of hoping your smoothie will fix everything. You pass through a side corridor and glimpse a physician speaking quietly with a servant. The tone is careful, measured. Health matters are rarely discussed openly here. To appear unwell is to appear vulnerable. And vulnerability does not suit a palace built on spectacle. Historians still debate how frequently Marie Antoinette herself suffered minor illnesses, headaches, fatigue, that were managed discreetly to preserve the image of vitality. You notice how quickly small signs are hidden. A cough becomes a pause. A yawn becomes a thoughtful gesture. Someone jokes softly that Versailles doesn't get sick, it merely takes unscheduled breaks. You think of modern offices insisting on productivity through seasonal colds. Some traditions endure. As you return to the salon, you sense how carefully everything is maintained. Fresh flowers replaced. Windows opened briefly, then closed. Perfume refreshed. All to sustain the illusion of perfect health. Yet beneath it, the human reality persists. Feet ache. Throats dry. Energy fades. You watch the Queen move gracefully through the room, her posture unwavering, and you wonder how much effort it takes to appear untouched by such strains. Because here, strength must be visible, even when it's fragile. A servant nearby murmurs that Versailles is like a stage where no one ever admits the play is tiring. Historians still debate how much this constant performance affected the well-being of those within the palace. But as another discreet cough echoes softly behind a fan, you realize something quietly true. Even in a palace of gold, people are still only human. By now, you've learned that not everything spoken in Versailles uses words. Sometimes, the conversation is carried by a flick of lace, a tilt of the wrist, or the subtle opening and closing of a fan. You notice it first during an evening gathering when a lady across the room adjusts her fan with deliberate precision, snapping it shut just as a gentleman approaches. He hesitates, pauses, then redirects his path entirely. No one says anything. And yet, a message has clearly been delivered. Historically, fans were more than accessories. They served practical purposes in the warm, crowded interiors of court life, but they also became tools of expression. Historians still debate how formalized this fan language truly was. But its use as a social signal is widely acknowledged. You watch closely as the Queen holds her own fan. She opens it slowly while listening, closes it when the conversation concludes, holds it near her cheek when amused. Each movement feels intentional. A lesser-known fact, certain gestures with fans were rumored to carry specific meanings, from interest to dismissal, though these codes likely varied and evolved. It's like texting, but with more wrist strength. You're handed a spare fan to carry. Not for use. For readiness. Because even accessories must be available on command. A maid nearby whispers that fans are the only acceptable way to express impatience. You begin to suspect she's only half joking. The room shifts as new guests arrive. You notice how some ladies shield their expressions behind painted silk. Others use their fans to create momentary privacy, a soft barrier between themselves and the ever-watchful court. Historians still debate how much of this subtle communication influenced alliances and relationships. But here, nuance matters. A fan lowered quickly may signal displeasure. One held still might suggest composure. You adjust your stance, careful not to obstruct anyone's line of sight. Because even observing requires etiquette. A small moment catches your attention, the Queen gently touches her fan to her lips as a remark lands. A pause. Then a measured response. The gesture is fleeting. Yet it shapes the tone of the exchange. A servant later murmurs that Versailles invented passive-aggressive body language centuries before modern meetings. You find the comparison oddly comforting. As the evening unfolds, you begin to see these movements everywhere. A flutter. A tilt. A subtle snap. Messages carried without sound. And as you stand quietly among them, you realize something quietly fascinating. In Versailles, silence speaks volumes. As the night continues, you begin to notice something that no amount of lace can soften. People are uncomfortable. Not openly, of course. No one here would admit such a thing, not when elegance depends on endurance. But you see it in the way a noble shifts slightly when she thinks no one is looking. In the way another subtly adjusts the angle of her corset beneath layers of silk. Fashion, here, comes first. Comfort arrives, if invited. Historically, 18th-century court attire prioritized structure over ease. Corsets, panniers, and layered skirts created the ideal silhouette, even if breathing became more of a suggestion than a guarantee. Historians still debate the long-term health effects of such garments, though complaints from the time suggest they were far from relaxing. You watch as the Queen settles into a chair, carefully, deliberately, her gown arranged so that it spills just right. Sitting, in this context, is less an action and more a negotiation. A lesser-known fact, some corsets were stiffened with whalebone, designed to maintain shape rather than accommodate movement. You silently thank modern elastic waistbands for their quiet heroism. A lady nearby leans forward slightly, then catches herself, posture corrected instantly. Because slouching is not merely impolite. It's unfashionable. A maid whispers that Versailles is proof humans once chose beauty over oxygen. You almost laugh again. The Queen's sleeves are adjusted. Her train smoothed. All to maintain the illusion of effortless grace. Historians still debate whether Marie Antoinette's later preference for simpler muslin dresses reflected personal taste or a subtle rejection of excessive formality. But here, tonight, tradition holds firm. You assist another attendant in arranging a shawl. It is light, decorative, entirely unnecessary, yet essential. Because in Versailles, appearance is reality. A guest rises from her seat, moving with the cautious precision of someone wearing both art and engineering. The effort is impressive and exhausting. A servant later jokes that walking in court fashion is like carrying a chandelier without using your hands. You think of modern high heels. Some struggles transcend centuries. As the evening deepens, the room remains poised, composed, beautiful, and quietly strained. You notice how people breathe shallowly, move minimally, smile continuously. And as you stand there, watching elegance maintained at such cost, you realize something quietly revealing. Here, discomfort is not a flaw. It is part of the design. Later, when the crowds thin and the formalities soften just slightly, you are permitted into a space few ever truly understand. The Queen's private rooms. They are smaller than you expected. Still elegant, of course, but quieter. The air feels different here. Less performative. Fewer footsteps echo. Fewer whispers linger. This is where Marie Antoinette retreats when she can. Historically, these inner chambers offered a rare escape from the rigid structure of court life. While never fully private, they allowed the Queen moments of relative normalcy. Historians still debate how much autonomy she truly enjoyed within these spaces, and how often she sought refuge from the relentless gaze of Versailles. You help arrange a small table near the window. A book rests there. Not ceremonial. Not displayed. Simply, read. A lesser-known fact, Marie Antoinette was known to enjoy music and literature in her private time, cultivating interests beyond court spectacle. You glimpse sheet music nearby. A harp stands in the corner. The setting feels almost domestic. A maid whispers that this is where the Queen sometimes laughs freely. The idea feels surprising. Here, the gowns are lighter. The posture less rigid. The smile, genuine. You assist in preparing a simpler dress, muslin, soft and flowing, far removed from the structured armor of earlier. Historians still debate whether her preference for such attire influenced broader fashion trends toward naturalism. But within these walls, it seems less about trend and more about relief. You notice how the Queen moves differently. Easier. More fluid. She speaks quietly with a close companion. No audience. No performance. A servant later jokes that even queens need a moment to breathe, preferably without 20 pounds of silk. You silently agree. The room's decor is understated compared to the grand salons. Pastels. Delicate patterns. Light. You adjust the curtains slightly, allowing evening air to drift in. For a moment, the palace feels less like a stage and more like a home. Yet even here, protocol lingers. Footsteps must remain soft. Voices measured. Because privacy in Versailles is never absolute. Historians still debate how much these moments shaped Marie Antoinette's resilience in the face of mounting public scrutiny. But as you stand quietly in this gentler space, you realize something quietly profound. Even within a palace built for spectacle, there are corners meant for being human. Tonight, the atmosphere shifts. Not with noise, but with anticipation. You're summoned earlier than usual, ushered into a chamber where whispers carry a different weight. The Queen is not ill. Exactly, but something significant is approaching. Childbirth. And in Versailles, even this most human of moments becomes a public event. Historically, royal births were conducted in the presence of witnesses to ensure legitimacy. The arrival of an heir was not just a family matter, it was a national concern. Historians still debate how emotionally taxing this practice must have been for royal mothers. You enter quietly, helping prepare linens. Soft, fresh, layered carefully. The room fills gradually, not with celebration, but with expectation. Nobles gather. Officials arrive. Doors remain open. Because privacy, in this context, is not permitted. A lesser-known fact, during the birth of Marie Antoinette's first child in 1778. So many people crowded into the chamber that the Queen reportedly suffered from lack of air. You glance at the windows. Closed. Candles burning steadily. The air feels heavy. A maid murmurs that modern delivery rooms would be considered scandalously empty by comparison. You almost smile, but the tension holds. The Queen is composed, though fatigue shadows her expression. Attendants move quietly. Instructions pass in hushed tones. And yet, the room continues to fill. Historians still debate whether these gatherings reassured the public or merely satisfied tradition. But here, tonight, the ritual endures. You assist with water basins. Adjust coverings. Ensure pathways remain clear as possible in a space increasingly crowded. The Queen's composure wavers briefly. A hand tightens on the bed. A breath catches. And for a moment, the spectacle falls away. She is simply a woman in labor. A servant later whispers that Versailles can turn even birth into theater. You think of how different this would feel in quiet solitude. But solitude is not an option here. Time stretches. Voices soften. The room waits. And as the moment finally arrives, a cry breaks through the hush. Relief ripples outward. The heir is presented. Witnessed. Confirmed. Protocol satisfied. Yet as the gathering slowly disperses, you notice the Queen's exhaustion, real, undeniable. Historians still debate how such experiences shaped her later relationship with public life. But as you help restore order to the chamber, you realize something quietly moving. Even in Versailles, life begins the same way. With breath and hope. After tonight, you begin to understand that survival in Versailles depends less on strength and more on silence. Not the peaceful kind, the careful kind. You notice it in the way attendants speak, or rather, don't speak, about what they've seen. The crowded birth chamber. The Queen's moment of weakness. The exhaustion she could not fully hide. All of it fades into quiet memory, never voiced aloud. Historically, discretion was an essential skill for anyone serving close to royalty. Loyalty was measured not only by service, but by restraint. Historians still debate how many private moments were preserved only through silence. You're handed linens to fold. Simple work. Yet the room hums with unspoken understanding. No one discusses the chaos of earlier. Instead, conversation drifts towards safer topics, weather, music, small details that cannot wound. A lesser-known fact, servants who breached confidence risked dismissal or worse. Making silence a practical necessity. You realize that here, knowing something is dangerous. Speaking of it is unthinkable. A maid murmurs that Versailles runs on secrets the way other places run on schedules. You nod slightly. The Queen rests in her private chamber now. The palace resumes its rhythm. But something has shifted. You sense it in the careful way attendants move. In the gentle avoidance of certain subjects. Historians still debate how much of Marie Antoinette's life was shaped by the knowledge that she was always observed, even in moments meant to be intimate. You adjust a curtain. Straighten a table. Routine returns. Yet the memory lingers. A servant later jokes that Versailles has more secrets than a locked diary. You almost smile again. But the truth beneath it feels heavier. Because in this place, silence is not emptiness. It is protection. And as you finish your tasks, you understand something quietly essential. To remain here, you must learn not only what to do, but what never to say. Tonight, the palace feels livelier again. Not calmer, never calmer, just louder in a different way. Laughter drifts from a salon down the corridor, bright and sharp like the clink of glass. You're summoned there with a tray balanced carefully in your hands, already guessing what kind of gathering this must be. Cards are laid out. Candles burn low. And coins, or rather, their elegant equivalents, shift from hand to hand. The Queen enjoys gaming. Historically, Marie Antoinette was known to participate in card games, particularly in her earlier years at court. Gambling was a fashionable pastime among the nobility, blending entertainment with social maneuvering. Historians still debate how much of her reputation for extravagance stemmed from these habits versus exaggerated rumor. You set down the tray quietly. Wine is poured. Fans flutter. And the game begins. The stakes are not always obvious. A nod. A hesitation. A glance exchanged across the table. A lesser-known fact, losses at court gaming tables could reach astonishing sums, sometimes equivalent to a modest estate. You think of modern online games with microtransactions. At least here, the purchases come with candlelight. The queen plays with composure. Measured. Attentive. You notice how conversation flows around the game. Light but focused. Because winning is pleasant. But losing gracefully is essential. A maid whispers that Versailles invented the concept of smiling through defeat. You watch as a noble gathers her winnings. Expression carefully neutral. Another accepts a loss with a slight bow. Historians still debate whether such gatherings strengthened bonds within the court or quietly fostered resentment. But the atmosphere tonight remains cordial. Mostly. A player drops a card. Laughter follows. Soft. Contained. You move through the room. Refilling glasses. Adjusting trays. The air feels warm, thick with perfume and anticipation. And beneath it, something else. Competition. Not fierce. But constant. A servant later jokes that Versailles turns leisure into strategy. You begin to believe it. The queen wins a round. A brief smile. Then the game continues. Time stretches again. Candles burn lower. And as you watch fortunes shift across the table, you realize something quietly familiar. Here, even relaxation has rules. And chance is rarely left entirely to luck. In the days that follow, something new begins to drift through Versailles. Not a scent this time. Not gossip. But tension. It lingers in conversations that stop when someone passes. In the way certain topics are mentioned briefly, then abandoned. Politics has always existed here, quietly. Politely, but now it feels closer. More present. Historically, by the late 1770s and into the 1780s. France faced mounting financial strain following wars and ongoing state expenses. Historians still debate how fully these realities were felt within the insulated world of Versailles. You hear it in fragments. A remark about taxes. A mention of unrest in distant towns. A noble's complaint about reform proposals. Nothing spoken loudly. Everything spoken carefully. A lesser-known fact, even within the palace. Discussions of fiscal policy could influence favor and alliances. You carry tea into a small gathering where voices lower as you approach. Not silent. Just measured. The queen listens to a visitor with composed interest. You notice how her expression remains steady, that practiced balance you've come to recognize. A maid whispers later that politics in Versailles is like perfume, subtle, persistent, and impossible to ignore. You think of how the air has felt heavier lately. Historians still debate the extent to which Marie Antoinette engaged directly with political matters or relied on advisors. But here, the atmosphere suggests awareness, even if action remains distant. A gentleman gestures with his fan, not for cooling, but emphasis. Another nods. A conversation concludes. You move quietly through the room, sensing how the mood shifts with each new arrival. Because opinions here are currency. And alliances, fragile. A servant jokes softly that Versailles has turned worry into a polite hobby. You almost smile again. The queen rises, signaling the gathering's end. The tension disperses slightly, like smoke carried away. Yet it lingers. In posture. In tone. In the careful way words are chosen. Outside, The gardens remain serene. Inside, the future feels less certain. And as you adjust a chair left slightly askew, you realize something quietly inevitable. Even in a palace built to display stability, change has already entered the room. You begin to notice that not all tension in Versailles comes from politics. Some of it lives much closer, among the servants themselves. At first, it seems subtle, a glance held a second too long, a task completed just a little too eagerly, a correction offered with excessive sweetness. Competition exists here too. Historically, positions within royal households were highly sought after. Even among servants, proximity to the queen meant influence and opportunity. Historians still debate how much internal rivalry shaped the daily functioning of court life. You see it when two attendants reach for the same tray. One yields, but not without a smile that feels rehearsed. A lesser-known fact, advancement within the royal household often depended on reputation as much as skill. You begin to understand why perfection matters. A maid whispers that Versailles has turned dusting into a competitive sport. You suspect she isn't entirely joking. Tasks are observed. Not formally, but always. You notice how one servant ensures her work is visible to a superior. Another positions herself near the Queen's path. A third volunteers for a task just before it's assigned. Historians still debate whether such rivalries fostered excellence or quietly eroded trust. But the effect is unmistakable. Even small errors carry weight. A misplaced ribbon, a delayed response, a slightly uneven fold. Each becomes material for comparison. A servant jokes that performance reviews here are conducted through silence. You adjust a curtain, aware now of eyes that may be watching. Not critically, just attentively. The Queen moves through her routine, unaware, or perhaps simply accepting, of the dynamics unfolding among those who serve her. Because proximity is limited, and every step closer matters. A tray is lifted smoothly. A door opened precisely. Each action an opportunity. Historians still debate how much these internal competitions influenced loyalty within the household. But as you pass another attendant in the corridor, exchanging a polite nod, you sense the quiet calculation beneath courtesy. Not hostility, just ambition. And as you return to your duties, you realize something quietly unsurprising. Even in service, hierarchy persists. Eventually, you are told the Queen will be leaving the main palace grounds. Not permanently, just temporarily. A retreat. You accompany the small procession toward a place spoken of in softer tones, the Petit Trianon. It feels different the moment you arrive. Smaller, quieter, less gilded. Historically, Marie Antoinette received the Petit Trianon as a personal gift from Louis XVI in 1774, offering her a space removed from the constant scrutiny of court life. Historians still debate whether this retreat allowed her genuine respite or simply shifted the stage. You help prepare the rooms. The air feels lighter here. The walls less imposing. A lesser-known fact, the Queen used this space to entertain a more intimate circle. Away from the rigid etiquette of Versailles. You notice the absence of crowds. No grand corridors filled with spectators. No endless procession of observers. A maid whispers that this is where the queen could almost pretend to be ordinary. You think of how extraordinary that must feel. The furnishings are elegant but restrained. Floral patterns. Soft tones. You adjust a vase near the window, catching a glimpse of the surrounding gardens. They appear less formal than those of Versailles. More natural. Historians still debate how much the Petit Trianon reflected Enlightenment ideals of simplicity. But here, the atmosphere is unmistakably calmer. The queen arrives. Her posture relaxes. Her smile softens. You assist with lighter attire, muslin again. Familiar now. The shift feels symbolic. A servant jokes that Versailles is a performance. But Trianon is rehearsal. You find the comparison fitting. Conversation flows more freely here. Laughter comes easier. Yet protocol remains, softened, not absent. Historians still debate whether this retreat contributed to perceptions of distance between the monarchy and the public. But within these walls, the intention feels personal. You arrange a small table for tea. The setting feels almost domestic. And as you step back, observing the queen in this quieter space, you realize something gently surprising. Even within privilege, there is a longing for simplicity. The longer you remain at the Petit Trianon, the more the illusion takes shape. Not the grand illusion of Versailles, that one is built from marble and ceremony. This is something softer, pastoral, constructed to feel natural. You're led beyond the main residence toward the gardens, where something unexpected waits. A village. Not quite real. Not entirely pretend. The Queen's Hamlet. Historically, Marie Antoinette commissioned the Hameau de la Reine, a rustic retreat designed to resemble a countryside village. Historians still debate whether it reflected genuine romantic ideals about rural life or an aesthetic escape from court pressures. You assist in preparing a visit. The Queen will walk here today. Paths are checked. Benches dusted. A lesser-known fact, the hamlet included working elements like a dairy and gardens. Though its primary purpose was leisure rather than production. You notice how carefully everything is arranged to appear unarranged. Wildflowers placed just so. Thatched roofs maintained to look charmingly imperfect. A maid whispers that this is nature with supervision. You nearly smile. The Queen arrives in simpler dress. Muslin again. Light. Flowing. She walks among the cottages with visible ease. The atmosphere invites informality. Conversation softens. Laughter feels unguarded. Historians still debate how such retreats influenced public perception, particularly as economic hardship grew beyond palace grounds. But here, the intention feels restorative. You help prepare fresh milk in the dairy, a symbolic gesture more than necessity. A servant jokes that Versailles has invented recreational farming. You think of modern hobby gardens. Some escapes never change. The Queen pauses near a small stream. For a moment, she seems entirely removed from the demands of monarchy. No audience. No spectacle. Just quiet. Yet even here, attendants remain. Protocol softened, not abandoned. Historians still debate whether this blending of simplicity and luxury deepened criticism of the monarchy's detachment. But as you observe the scene, you sense something quietly human. The desire to step away. To breathe. to belong to a world that feels smaller. And as you stand beside the arranged wildflowers, you realize something gently ironic. Even simplicity requires maintenance. Even here, in the gentle quiet of the hamlet, the outside world finds its way in. Not through letters, not through proclamations, but through rumor. It arrives in fragments, carried by visiting attendants, murmured by suppliers, hinted at in conversations that drift just a little too close to reality. Bread. You begin hearing the word more often. Historically, fluctuations in grain supply and rising bread prices became a growing concern in the years leading up to the Revolution. Historians still debate how much of this hardship was fully understood within royal circles at the time. You assist in preparing a simple refreshment. Milk. Fresh fruit. Pastoral calm. Yet the whispers persist. A maid mentions shortages in Paris. Another speaks of unrest in provincial towns. Nothing dramatic. Just unease. A lesser-known fact, grain markets were highly sensitive to weather and transport disruptions, making bread availability a constant concern for ordinary citizens. You notice how these discussions remain cautious. Never accusatory. Never loud. The Queen listens to a companion describe conditions beyond the palace gates. Her expression remains composed, but thoughtful. A servant jokes quietly that Versailles hears bad news the way one hears distant thunder, present, but not immediate. You think of how far Paris feels from this quiet garden. Historians still debate whether Marie Antoinette was shielded from the full severity of public hardship by those around her. But the tone of conversation suggests awareness. Even if incomplete, the hamlet remains serene. Streams reflect the sky. Flowers sway. And yet, the knowledge lingers. Outside this curated simplicity, lives unfold differently. You carry a tray past a window and glimpse the horizon beyond the grounds. It feels vast. Unpredictable. A maid later murmurs that no wall can keep out hunger forever. You say nothing, because silence remains the safest response. The Queen rises to continue her walk. The moment passes. The calm resumes. But as you follow at a respectful distance, you realize something quietly unavoidable. Even in places designed for escape, reality waits patiently beyond the gate. When you return to Versailles, the atmosphere feels altered. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. Conversations pause a little more often. Eyes linger a moment longer when names are mentioned. And one name, in particular, begins to circulate with unusual persistence. A necklace. Not just any necklace. A diamond one. Historically, the affair of the diamond necklace erupted in the mid-1780s. Involving a lavish piece originally commissioned for Louis XV but left unpaid after his death. Historians still debate how a scandal involving forged letters and mistaken identities managed to entangle the Queen's reputation so completely. You hear the story in fragments. A cardinal. A countess. A transaction that never truly occurred. Yet the implication spreads. A lesser-known fact, Marie Antoinette had actually declined the necklace when it was offered, considering it too extravagant. And yet, rumor insists otherwise. You assist in arranging correspondence as discussions ripple through the palace. Some voices express disbelief. Others. Uncertainty. A maid whispers that truth moves slowly, but scandal travels on horseback. You find the metaphor fitting. Pamphlets begin to circulate beyond the palace. Inside, reactions remain measured. Careful. The Queen continues her routine. Composed. Yet you sense the shift. Historians still debate how deeply this affair damaged public perception of her. But within Versailles, the tension is unmistakable. You pass a group of attendants discussing the matter in hushed tones. No one claims certainty, but everyone has heard something. A servant jokes that Versailles could survive famine more easily than gossip. You almost smile again. The necklace itself remains unseen by you. Yet its presence feels everywhere. In tone. In posture. In silence. As you adjust a curtain in the Queen's chamber, you notice how carefully she maintains her composure. Publicly unchanged. Privately, perhaps burdened. Historians still debate whether this scandal marked a turning point in her relationship with public opinion. But as whispers continue to circulate, you realize something quietly powerful. In Versailles, perception can outweigh reality. After the necklace affair, the corridors feel colder. Not in temperature. Versailles still struggles with drafts in all the usual places, but in tone. People speak more carefully now. Laughter arrives later. Smiles feel measured. The Queen continues her routines, the lever, the audiences, the walks, yet something intangible has shifted. Historically, scandals did not need to be proven to influence reputation. Historians still debate how much of the growing distrust toward Marie Antoinette was fueled by misunderstanding rather than fact. You sense it in the way conversations pause when she passes. Not disrespectful. Just cautious. A lesser-known fact, printed pamphlets mocking the Queen became increasingly popular during this period, shaping public sentiment far beyond the palace. Inside Versailles, their impact is quieter, but present. You carry linens through a corridor where two attendants exchange a glance before resuming their tasks. No words spoken, yet meaning conveyed. A maid whispers that Versailles has begun holding its breath. You understand. Even minor incidents now feel amplified. A delayed response. A forgotten detail. Each takes on new weight. Historians still debate how deeply this atmosphere affected daily life within the court. But you notice the subtle vigilance. Doors opened promptly. Announcements delivered precisely. Protocol observed without exception. As though perfection might counter uncertainty. The Queen's composure remains. Her smile, practiced. Her posture, steady. Yet the effort seems greater. A servant jokes softly that Versailles is now afraid of its own reflection. You adjust a vase slightly, ensuring symmetry. Because details matter more than ever. Outside, Paris continues its restless rhythm. Inside, the palace grows watchful. And as you move through the evening's preparations, you realize something quietly sobering. When trust begins to fade, even silence can feel loud. The rituals continue, but they no longer feel quite the same. You notice it during the morning lever. The choreography remains perfect. Yet something beneath it has loosened. Not visibly, but perceptibly. Historically, court etiquette was designed to project stability and control. Historians still debate how long such structures can endure once confidence begins to waver. A sleeve is adjusted a moment later than usual. A noble hesitates before stepping forward. Tiny deviations. Yet here, even the smallest shift carries meaning. You assist as the queen prepares for the day. The same layers. The same sequence. But the atmosphere feels less certain. A lesser-known fact, etiquette manuals of the time were extensive. Yet much of court behavior relied on shared understanding rather than written rules. When that understanding weakens, formality begins to falter. A maid whispers that Versailles is learning how to doubt. You smooth the gown's train. Perfectly aligned. Because outward precision remains essential. The queen moves through her routine with composure. Yet you sense the effort required to maintain it. Historians still debate whether such moments signaled the beginning of deeper institutional strain. But you notice how conversations pause more often. How gestures feel deliberate. Even the grand corridors seem quieter. A servant jokes softly that etiquette is like glass, elegant, but fragile. You think of how easily routines can persist even as meaning fades. The queen receives visitors. Smiles. Responds. Everything appears intact. And yet, something intangible has shifted. A door closes more firmly than necessary. A bow lingers too long. Historians still debate how visible these changes were to those outside the palace. But inside, they resonate. You adjust a curtain, ensuring light falls evenly. Because symmetry suggests order. And order reassures. As the day unfolds, you realize something quietly revealing. The rules remain. But belief in them is beginning to thin. The news does not arrive with ceremony. It arrives in a whisper. Passed from one servant to another. Repeated cautiously. Then confirmed. The Bastille has fallen. Historically, the storming of the Bastille on July 14, 1789, became a defining moment of the French Revolution. Historians still debate how immediately its significance was understood within Versailles. You hear it first in the corridor. A murmur. A question. Then the answer. Voices lower. Movements slow. The palace continues its routines, but the rhythm feels uncertain. A lesser-known fact, the Bastille held few prisoners at the time of its capture. Yet its symbolic importance far outweighed its practical role. You assist with preparations as usual. Gowns arranged. Rooms prepared. Yet attention drifts. A maid whispers that Paris has spoken loudly. You sense the tension rising. Not panic, but awareness. Historians still debate how much the Queen grasped the implications in that first moment. But the atmosphere shifts unmistakably. Guests speak in hushed tones. Conversations circle the event without naming it directly. The Queen remains composed. Her routine continues. Because stability must be displayed. A servant jokes softly that Versailles is pretending not to hear the thunder. You think of the distant city. The crowds. The uncertainty. Inside, candles are lit. Music plays. Protocol persists. Yet beneath it, something trembles. Historians still debate whether this moment marked the true beginning of irreversible change. But as you adjust a chair left slightly askew, you realize something quietly profound. The world beyond the palace walls is no longer waiting. In the days after the Bastille, Versailles feels thinner. Not physically. The marble still gleams. The gardens remain symmetrical. The candles burn as steadily as ever. But the certainty that once filled these halls has begun to fade. You notice it in the way people listen now, not just to one another, but for something beyond the walls. Historically, news from Paris traveled quickly after the Bastille's fall, carried by messengers, travelers, and rumor alike. Historians still debate how secure Versailles truly remained in those first weeks. You assist with preparations as usual. Curtains drawn. Chairs arranged. The routine continues. Yet conversation feels cautious. A lesser-known fact, many nobles began quietly reconsidering their positions during this period. Uncertain of what the future might bring. You pass a small group gathered near a window. Their voices are low, measured. A maid whispers that even the palace stones seem to be listening. You find yourself moving more carefully, as though stability might depend on precision. The queen appears composed. Her posture remains unchanged. Her smile, practiced. Yet the effort shows. Historians still debate how deeply the events in Paris affected her sense of safety. But the atmosphere suggests awareness. A servant jokes softly that Versailles is learning to feel fear politely. You adjust a vase, ensuring its placement is exact. Because details still matter. Outside, the gardens remain serene. Inside, uncertainty grows. Guests depart earlier. Conversations shorten. Even laughter feels restrained. Historians still debate whether this shift marked the beginning of the palace's loss of authority. But as you stand quietly in a corridor once filled with confident voices, you realize something quietly undeniable. Versailles no longer feels untouchable. You see it first in her eyes. Not in public. Not during audiences or rituals. But in a moment between movements, when the queen pauses near a window. Believing no one is watching. The composure remains. The posture holds. Yet something softer has appeared. Fatigue. Concern. Perhaps even uncertainty. Historically, in the months following the Bastille's fall, the royal family faced growing pressure as unrest spread across France. Historians still debate how personally vulnerable Marie Antoinette felt during this period. You assist with the familiar routines. Gowns adjusted. Hair arranged. The performance continues. Yet the effort is unmistakable. A lesser-known fact, letters from the Queen during this time reveal a growing awareness of the seriousness of events unfolding beyond Versailles. You notice how her movements remain graceful. Her voice steady. But the pauses linger. A maid whispers that even marble can crack under strain. You think of the palace itself. Still magnificent. Yet less certain. The Queen receives visitors. Smiles. Responds. All as expected. But when she turns away, the mask softens. Historians still debate how much this duality shaped her later legacy. Public strength. Private concern. A servant jokes softly that Versailles has learned to worry elegantly. You adjust a curtain. Light falls gently across the room. Outside, the gardens remain unchanged. Inside, resolve feels quieter, more deliberate. And as you watch her prepare for another audience, you realize something quietly human. Even symbols can feel afraid. The routines grow quieter now. Not abandoned. Just softened. Fewer visitors arrive. Conversations shorten. Even the grand corridors seem to echo differently. You continue your duties. Gowns arranged. Rooms prepared. Candles lit. Historically, as unrest intensified in 1789, Versailles became increasingly uncertain as a center of royal authority. Historians still debate when those within the palace truly realized the permanence of change. The Queen moves through her day with the same composure. Yet the scale has shifted. Fewer audiences. More private moments. A lesser-known fact, many members of the court began departing Versailles during this period. Seeking safety elsewhere. You notice the absence. Spaces once filled now stand open. A maid whispers that the palace feels like a theater after the audience has left. You think of how grand rooms can seem smaller without observers. The Queen pauses in her private chamber. You assist with simple preparations. Lighter attire. Fewer layers. Historians still debate whether these adjustments reflected practicality or quiet acceptance. A servant jokes softly that Versailles is learning how to whisper. You adjust a vase. Straighten a chair. Small acts of order in a shifting world. Outside, Paris remains restless. Inside, calm persists. Yet it feels temporary. And as you move through the fading routine, you realize something quietly inevitable. This chapter is ending. The morning arrives without announcement. No grand procession. No eager visitors gathering for the lever. Just a quiet awareness that something final is unfolding. You move through the Queen's chamber with familiar care, arranging what little remains to be arranged. Historically, in October 1789, mounting unrest culminated in the royal family's departure from Versailles for Paris. Historians still debate whether this moment marked the symbolic end of the palace's political centrality. The Queen prepares. Not in splendor, but in restraint. Fewer layers. Simpler fabrics. A lesser-known fact, as the royal family left Versailles, many attendants remained behind, their roles dissolving along with the court itself. You assist with the final details. A shawl. A glove. Small gestures that once held immense significance. The Queen moves through the room one last time. Her composure intact. Her posture steady. Yet the silence feels heavier than any ceremony. A maid whispers that even Versailles must learn to let go. You follow at a respectful distance as preparations conclude. Historians still debate how this departure reshaped perceptions of monarchy across France. But within these walls, the meaning feels immediate. Rooms once alive with ritual now stand still. Corridors echo softly. Candles burn lower. A servant jokes quietly that the palace is finally resting. You think of how long it has performed. Outside, the day waits. Inside, memory lingers. And as the Queen prepares to leave, you realize something quietly profound. The golden cage has opened. Not by choice, but by change. The corridors grow still. The whispers fade. The routines dissolve into memory like perfume lingering long after its source has vanished. You find yourself standing in a space once defined by movement, now softened by absence. The Queen's presence, once constant, feels distant, like a melody that has ended but still hums quietly in the mind. Versailles exhales. For the first time, it does not perform. It simply remains. And you, too, feel the stillness settle, the weight of silk replaced by the lightness of quiet. The candlelight dims. The echoes soften. Outside, the world continues its restless turning. Inside, the palace rests in gentle silence. Your steps slow. Your breath steadies. And as the last glow of ceremony fades into memory, the night gathers softly around you. Let the hush remain. Let the marble cool. Let the story drift into calm. End of script. Sweet dreams.